Hello again, and I'm so pleased to see everybody here. Thank you very much for attending this session. I'm really excited about this session in the Center for Gulf Studies seminar series, in part because when I first listened to Maha in a forum a few months ago, I was completely blown away by the very exciting subject that she was talking about, and the passion and incredible sort of thoughtfulness in which she was addressing a question with which I have to confess I was not super familiar, which is the question of environmental activism, particularly by Iraqi youth and particularly in southern Iraq, but I think more broadly in general. I'm going to, as you probably know, the format of these talks is that Maha is going to begin by discussing her own, coming to the subject that she's working on a little bit, so that we all have a sense of how she has become involved in this and her personal and intimate connections to it. And then she's going to present her work and her research, her lived research, I have to say, on the question of climate change and activism on that. After she finishes the presentation, we'll open the floor to question and answer. So at this point, I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to invite Maha to speak. Maha.
Thank you, Leila, and yeah, thank you for the introduction and this invitation. I am Maha Yassin, I'm Iraqi. I came from the southern of Iraq, province of Basra. I lived there most of my life. I studied there. I studied geology, where I researched the impact of sand and dust storm on food availability or security in the south. And then I moved to the Netherlands 7 years ago to study and also to work. And during my studies, we had in Basra a big protest because of a water issue. And my studies was about media culture and society, and I wanted to focus on that topic. So I focused on climate activism, and specifically the media framing of the climate activism in Iraq, and used what happened in Basra, which was a big media campaign called Save Basra, as a case study. And I compared how the digital media, or the modern media and the conventional media, framed the activist and their basically campaign, and the impact of this campaign on them, and also on the Basra and the problem in general over there related to water pollution and scarcity. And during my studies, I interned in a Dutch research institute, a think tank, who were starting a project on climate security, focusing on the Middle East in general, but specifically on Iraq. And it was a little bit different from my focus, because so I wasn't really giving the space to talk about activism a lot, but mostly on the impact of climate change on stability in a very fragile state like Iraq. And we did this for 3 years, and but it was quite challenging as well, because security in Iraq is a matter of the security apparatus. So linking climate and environmental issues to security and stability was not a conventional topic for the government officials over there, or security officials. So we faced a little bit of reluctance or hesitance to cooperate with us. So we spent quite a lot of time meeting people individually, talking to them, explaining the purpose of our project and what we want to do, or which was basically a research kind of a project. And then we managed to establish the first ever climate security workshop in the south of Iraq. And we chose to focus in the south of Iraq because the impact of climate change and environmental degradation is very big. And it was an interesting kind of dynamics to see between the people that we managed to bring around one table to discuss what we saw a common threat that affecting all these political factions from and also different who have also different ethnic and religious backgrounds. So the purpose of the project is we also use climate change as an entry point for peace building among all these actors or stakeholders. So we brought the officials from the local government, the activists, civil society, academics, and the media, and we let the people themselves lead the discussions and present their own ideas. But we also didn't want to focus on what is the problem. We also wanted them to present solution and how to link the people who present this solution to the decision makers. So the next stage was also held a meeting in Baghdad, in the capital, with representatives from the ministries, and also bring these people that we met in Basra who are affected by the problem most and in touch with the people on the ground. And then we established what we called the Basra Forum for Environment, Climate and Security. And our role was basically to manage this workshop, but the people are the ones who lead the conversation and discussions. The purpose eventually was to mainstream climate security and raise awareness about the impact that Iraq is not, the stability of Iraq do not come from internal political conflict or from terrorist group, but also from another threat, unconventional security threat, which is climate change. And we saw that there was, at the beginning, there was a little bit of hesitance and reluctance, but then with the time, people accepted it and they themselves started to approach us and give us examples of how the climate change is affecting their stability. And we also worked with a lot of journalists, local journalists in Iraq, who wrote about the issue, produced multimedia content about the impact of climate change and on stability, and they focus on small areas, and they wrote these articles also in Arabic, and they publish it on Iraqi and Arabic media platforms. So this is what I did for about 3 years, a little bit for more 3 years, and then currently I'm working as a climate fellow for the Institute of Regional and International Studies, which is part of the American University in Sulaymaniyah. And we work on different research projects. The latest one was the impact of water scarcity on social cohesion. And it was quite interesting kind of topic because we were meeting a lot of people on the ground who were explaining basically to us how water scarcity specifically is affecting their livelihoods and the impact of basically water scarcity on stability in general. And I also wanted to talk, if you allow me, on the different manifestations of the impact of climate change. So, of course, the most apparent one is water scarcity, but we also have heat waves, which became longer, more frequent, but also the temperature in summer easily exceeds 50 Celsius. And with that comes the sand and dust storms, that comes with a lot of economic losses and also health problems to the people. We do also have a problem of water salinization, and this is something that we see more to the south because of the low level of rainfall, but also the low level of water that comes from Turkey and Iran. And yeah, and the water standard, and also pollution. And pollution also because of the low level, but also the local activities of the oil industry, especially in the south of Iraq, who polluted the air, but also exploit the water, the already scarce water. I think a lot of researchers that I talked to mentioned that to produce 1 barrel of oil, you need 2 to 5 barrels of water. And also the neglect, let's say, of these oil companies who re-inject the polluted water to the soil, polluting the groundwater. So it's like, it looks like that the activities of the oil industry are contributing to the issue, and also the local authorities are turning the blind eye because they believe that oil is a national security issue. So basically, they let the industry do whatever they want. And the reasons, of course, a lot of people and a lot of researchers, they talk about it's the impact of a climate change. But in my opinion, it's 50% the climate change and 50% the management of or the lack of thereof, the response, basically the poor response to the impact of a climate change. Of course, the European countries are also affected by water scarcity, but their response, building more dams or turning the courses of the rivers inside their country, like in Iran. This is why we have less and less water in Tigris and Euphrates. But also, when Iraq tried to negotiate with these countries, they always say, well, the water that you receive, you're not managing it well. That's why you have a bigger problem in Iraq. You see the impact of climate change even bigger, which is, of course, true. In Iraq, we still use outdated irrigation systems. The management of the infrastructure is also outdated. The capacities are not developed enough to respond to such a big issue that has been developing for years and years, but also because of the internal and external conflict has been shelved. It was always considered as a luxury problem, and we have bigger issues like terrorism, like wars that we need to immediately respond to. That's why whatever the government or the authorities are trying to do now is still, the impact of it, the positive impact of it, is still very limited and small. And because of that, like what is happening because of all these problems, first we have what we call it climate migration or displacement. And this is where people who are basically living in the marshes or in the countryside communities started to lose their livelihoods. They are not able to plant their lands. They are not able to keep their the buffalo, which is one of the main livelihoods that people depend on in the marshes. So they started basically to leave these areas, and they leave to the urban centers, either in the south or north. And this, of course, started to bring another layer of a problem. They started to clash with the people who are living in the centers because of the competition over job opportunities and over the resources, over, for example, electricity network, and they live like in an unorganized neighborhoods. So they of course still need public services, and then they are not provided with it, so they have to take it illegally. So they created a lot of pressure on the urban centers. And the other thing is that people who live in the marshes, they have a different customs, let's say, that people in the city find it difficult to accept, so they clash a lot. But also in their areas, people from the marshes, they do not immediately immigrate to the cities. They immigrate to the smaller villages closer to them, where there is still a little bit of water. And this is also creating a tribal conflict in these areas that could easily escalate into an armed conflict. A lot of these tribes are heavily armed, and when an armed conflict starts, even the government sometimes find it difficult to control, and sometimes they have to bring support from different provinces to control the conflict. So these are like what we saw basically is that the impact of water scarcity and climate change is increasing the instability in these regions that is mostly affected by it. And also a lot of people refer to that the issues of, for example, arms trade and drug abuse and trade is also increased in these areas that is affected by drought. It's because basically people are looking for another way to provide for their families. So some of them take that path, unfortunately. And the problem is growing, especially the drugs, and affecting the society very much. So I think like it's because of like the slow response of the government. We had the civil society starting to pick up this issue, start to raise awareness about it, using very simple tools, which is social media. They monitor the problem, they talked about it, and their impact is still very limited. But since 2018, the water scarcity issue and then pollution that we have in Basra, the whole campaign started on social media. People started to talk about it, reported that the water is polluted, and they started to monitor the animals dying in the rivers, and then people started to get sick. And the problem became bigger and bigger, with a very limited response from the local authorities. And then people started to protest in the streets. And the protests were very big. People basically lost their lives, a few of these activists. The government interfered, but also the armed groups that belongs to some political party also interfered. And they clashed with the activists and with the people who are protesting in the streets. After the 2018 in Iraq, we had what is called the Shrink movement, and this is the a bigger grassroots protest that took over almost the whole country and changed the government at that time. And in my opinion, the protests in Basra basically opened the door for the young people to protest in 2018 and to lead this what they call the Shrine movement. So you can see that like a water issue that happened in Basra basically destabilized the whole country. And we are still, Iraq is still suffering from the impact of that problem. In 2000, because of this Shrine movement, a lot of it was led by the young people, by activists. It spotlighted, of course, these people who were targeted by non-state actors. They were accused of destabilizing security. They were also accused of collaborating with foreign actors who do not intend for the country to be stable. And a lot of them were basically kidnapped and killed and tortured and so on. Climate activists, unfortunately, were put in the same category. They were also treated as political activists, and some of them were threatened, some of them had to leave the country, some of them also were kidnapped, and some of them were killed. So they were put in the same country, and this is why a lot of them basically had to lower their voices on social media, leave their activist work altogether, because if they weren't the target, their families were the target. So you can see that the response, like to climate change, is getting worse and worse. The government only now trying to do something about it, but as I mentioned earlier, the problem is so big, and this is why the government needed the support of, in my opinion, of the civil society internet, but because they were seen or regarded as political activists, the response slowed down. But not only the local environmental NGOs are affected by this shrinking space for their work. In some provinces, the international organizations are also monitored, and in some areas even prevented from bringing, let's say, aid or support to the affected communities. So you see, the response to this issue is very political. In some provinces, if you have the political party that is leading or controlling the government, if they are willing to allow these international organizations to work, if they are treating the civil society a lot better, you will see more activities, a better response. While in other places where there is a political party that do not want any foreign interference, you see the space for the local and international civil society is very small and they cannot work. And this means that the communities, the vulnerable communities, are suffering even more. And this is something that we see more in Maysan province, and where big marshes, the largest marshes in Iraq, is located. I think, yeah, I'm happy to respond to any question if you have, Leila, or others.
Great, thank you. That was incredibly useful. Before I turn off the recording and turn over the questions to others, can I ask a couple of questions? First, can you say a little bit about who the young folks were who started the environmental activism around questions of water scarcity, and who started recording sort of the deaths of people's livestock and their illnesses?
Yeah.
And then the second question that I've got is, you mentioned something about there being differences. For example, you said that Maysan province, because of it has very large marshes, it has a certain set of politics. Can you talk about what the difference, if you're comfortable, can you talk a little bit about which provinces tend to be the most repressive, and which provinces tend to be more open to questions of environmental activism? And what do you think dictates that?
So the people basically who are involved in this climate activism, I think there's two groups. You have the registered or organized or specialized environmental NGOs who basically lead the raising awareness campaign and advocacy, and who have funds and a smaller project by the international organizations. And most of it is just young people. They work in these organizations as volunteers. And then you have individual activists, greening campaigns, or just like normal people who basically able to access social media. And they are also like reporting on this issue. And it was all a grassroots campaign, like it was called Save Basra campaign in 2018, and a lot of people organized themselves after that, or either registered or also became like a registered campaigns. Mostly young people from universities, schools, and yeah, it's this is like what I see. And also researchers from the universities, they work with them, they support their work. If they wanted an evidence, scientific evidence, they also collaborate with them.
Can I quickly interrupt you?
Yeah.
Are there, obviously the people that are most directly affected, particularly by the questions of water scarcity, are, as you said, either the marsh Arabs, or they are the sort of the agricultural or pastoral people who are directly affected. So it sounds to me quite working class or agricultural classes. Are there people that are actually involved in the protests that come from these classes? How are the activists that, say, for example, are university-based or NGO-based reaching out to these folks?
Yeah. So there are indeed like activists from the marshes itself. Even though it's a marshes, it sounds like it's a bit isolated and far away, but they are quite connected to what is happening in general. So we always see these videos that comes from the marshes on like about the drought, about the mass death of livestock and fisheries. So they also advocate for that. But we also saw almost every summer there is a small scale of protest in these areas by the farmers themselves. And sometimes they even threat to head to the oil companies, because they see that these companies are flourishing, are getting bigger and bigger, while these people are their livelihoods basically diminishing and shrinking. So I think there is like a lot of activities over there. We do not always hear about it, but it happens. How they are connected? There are local NGOs or let's say community leaders over there who are in connections, like they work as a focal point between the bigger organizations, the international organization, the researchers, and these people on the ground. They sometimes hire these activists to do research for them, to do surveys, so they are easily linked to them to report on the issue. And yeah, the other like the province is like which one that allows more access. I think it's clear between the north and the south, the Kurdistan region, and then the rest of the country. In the Kurdistan region, you see there's more openness to allow international organizations, international also governments to basically work there, to collaborate with the local governments, the Kurdistan region government, and also civil society. So you see most of the response, most of the fund goes to this region because politically is more stable, and political leaders or authorities basically do not harass the civil society and the international community as much. While if you go to the mostly the southern part of the country, the civil society and international organizations are heavily monitored. And even the researchers now, there was recently a letter from Ministry of Education that asked researchers to be transparent on the funds that they receive, if it was from international organizations or government. And they even mentioned some organizations by name to not work with them, civil organizations. So they are making it more and more difficult for the civil society to operate over there. to participate in meaningful, let's say, contributions. But even with that, they are still working. Even with that, there are still some, let's say, brave people who want to collaborate and want to work on these issues.
There's a question in the chat, which is about which region of Iraq you've seen the most activism relating to water security. And then I've got one more question, and then I'm going to turn off the recording after you answer. The other question that I have is about the effect of nationalist or resource sovereignty on environmental activism. Let me explain. So recently, there's been some effort in the United States, for example, to limit oil exploration in Alaska, and the indigenous communities there are totally divided. There are some that absolutely think that oil exploitation there would destroy their environment, and they consider themselves water protectors. And then there are some that believe that, in fact, having sovereign access over their oil can allow them to proceed with, to improve their livelihoods, given that that community has suffered from quite bad inequality. I suspect that something like that also exists in Iraq. Can you also speak to that? So the first question was about which region has seen the most activism, and then this question about sovereignty over resources and the way that that affects. And then I'm going to turn off the recording after you answer, and then turn on the questions.
Yeah, so in my opinion, like, because the problem is bigger to the south, and this to respond to any question, there is more, let's say, work and activism around this issue. But this doesn't mean that there wasn't in the north, and in the north, in the Kurdistan region, it's also big there because they are allowed to. So the civil society there is more equipped, more advanced, and there was one because they have been working on these issues even before 2003, in my opinion, or maybe even after. But then they got a lot of support from international organizations. So let's say the capacity is over there is better. But to the south, it's the problem is bigger when it comes to water security. That's why like you hear more voices from there as well. But yeah, the response is way less. And also, like, the impact, of course, like in the Kurdistan region, they are the water provision there is better. They are closer to Turkey, so they have, let's say, better control on their water resources than in the south. So I think, yeah, it's we cannot basically say I can say that the impact is worse in the south, but who is responding better? It's almost the same. It's the whole country is affected by the problem. And yeah, here the question was about, like, how people respond to the activities of oil industry in their area. I think, if I understood well, Leila, I think it's a lot of people in these marshes area, because of the drought, they left their jobs to take like jobs with the oil companies. This is something that we saw, and it's also another reason of a tribal conflict in this region. Like these people who lost their natural or their old livelihoods, and now they are started to compete on who to work with the oil company that is close to his region or his area. So a lot of activists from, let's say, in Maysan province, they say oil companies are bringing, are instigating or escalating these issues among the tribes, because there's this conflict, and of course, some of them say that these oil companies are even taking lands that is either rented by these farmers from the government, or these farmers sell their land to these oil companies. They get compensated from it, but they also request that their sons or their children work for these oil companies. And then the conflict starts. So if one tribe has more sons work with this oil company, other tribe also wanted the same. So they became another reason of problems, according to some activists that I talked to from Misan, at least.
Great, thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.